Donald Trump's presidency is barely underway, and he's already making waves. In his inaugural address, he dropped a bombshell that's got the entire world talking: the Panama Canal. That's right. Trump hinted at reclaiming America's influence over one of the most critical trade routes on the planet. The Panama Canal isn't just a waterway. It's the lifeline of global trade, connecting the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and fueling the economies of the US, China, and beyond. But here's the twist. Trump's bold rhetoric isn't just about trade. It's about power. Could this move be a direct challenge to China's growing influence in Latin America? Is the US gearing up for a new geopolitical battle? And how will this impact the global economy, BRICS nations, and even OPEC? Buckle up, because the next chapter in Trump's political legacy is already shaping up to be a game changer. Let's dive in. The importance of Panama and its canal. The Panama Canal is not just a marvel of engineering, it's the backbone of global trade. This 82-kilometer passage saves ships thousands of miles in travel, shaving weeks off transit times and slashing costs. Over 14,000 ships cross the canal annually, carrying an estimated 5% of the world's total trade. The canal is crucial for major economies like the US, China, and even the BRICS nations. But here's what makes the canal even more strategic. The Panama Canal isn't just about commerce, it's about control. Since its transfer to Panama in 1999, the canal has been operated by the Panamanian government. But over the past decade, China has been ramping up its presence in Panama through billion-dollar investments and infrastructure projects. Critics argue this has given Beijing significant leverage over one of the world's most vital trade routes. Now, enter Donald Trump. During his inauguration, his veiled remarks hinted at restoring American dominance over critical global infrastructures. For Trump, the Panama Canal represents not just an economic tool, but also a symbol of American influence slipping away. The question is, will he act on it? As the US economy works to reassert itself globally, reclaiming influence over the Panama Canal could reshape trade dynamics not just for America, but for every major player, from China to the BRICS nations. What happens if Trump pushes forward with this bold agenda? Let's move to the next part, Trump's bold inaugural move. During his inaugural address, Donald Trump made waves by referencing the need to protect American interests in critical global infrastructures. While he didn't name the Panama Canal outright, political analysts and economic experts alike have speculated that his remarks hinted at reasserting US influence over the canal. Why? Because for decades, the canal has symbolized not just logistical efficiency, but geopolitical power. For Trump, the Panama Canal represents far more than a trade route. It's a linchpin for US economic security. By regaining influence, the US could not only secure its supply chains, but also block rival nations like China from gaining leverage. And here's the kicker. Trump framed this as a national security issue, stating that America cannot afford to lose control over vital arteries of commerce. But what does this mean for US-Panama relations? Historically, Panama has enjoyed sovereignty over the canal since 1999. But Trump's rhetoric could put this delicate balance in jeopardy. If the US were to pursue a more hands-on approach, it could strain ties with Panama and trigger political resistance, both domestically and internationally. The implications extend beyond Panama. Regional players in Latin America and global powers like China, who have invested heavily in Panama, are watching closely. Trump's bold stance could set the stage for escalating competition, pushing the US and China into yet another economic battleground. Will Trump follow through on this veiled promise? And what would such a move mean for the global trade landscape? Let's dive deeper into the geopolitical dynamics with China's stake in the Panama Canal. How this impacts global powers like China and BRICS. China's growing presence in Latin America has been one of the most significant global economic shifts in recent decades, and the Panama Canal plays a crucial role in its strategy. Beijing has invested billions in Panama's infrastructure, including upgrading canal facilities and funding surrounding projects, positioning itself as a dominant player in the region. For China, the canal is more than a trade route. It's a strategic artery that ensures smooth shipping of goods to and from Latin America, a critical region for its Belt and Road Initiative. Nearly 40% of China's shipping to the Americas relies on the canal. Whether it's consumer goods heading to the US or raw materials like copper and soybeans flowing back to China, the canal's efficiency directly impacts Beijing's economic agenda. Any disruption or increased US control could threaten these critical supply lines, forcing China to rethink its logistics and perhaps even its geopolitical posture in the Western Hemisphere. Now let's widen the scope to BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. With China as a leading force in the bloc, BRICS nations have been ramping up economic collaborations in Latin America, including trade partnerships and investments in natural resources. Trump's potential push to reassert US influence over the Panama Canal could disrupt these plans, making it harder for BRICS to solidify its foothold in the Americas. This could also lead to heightened tensions between the US and BRICS, reigniting debates over global trade dominance. Trump's bold moves might also trigger a chain reaction. If the US seeks to control the canal or impose new restrictions, BRICS nations, especially China, might retaliate by fortifying their economic alliances in other regions, such as Africa or Southeast Asia. It's a strategic chess game, and the Panama Canal has become an unlikely but pivotal piece on the board. As Trump seeks to make bold statements about reclaiming America's economic power, the question remains: will these moves backfire by alienating global powers like China and disrupting the very trade networks they aim to protect? Let's explore how this might escalate with OPEC, oil, and the canal's role in world energy trade. OPEC and energy trade dynamics. The Panama Canal isn't just a lifeline for consumer goods. It's a critical artery for global energy trade. Every year, millions of barrels of oil and liquefied natural gas, LNG, pass through the canal, making it a vital route for energy shipments between producers and consumers. For OPEC, which dominates global oil exports, the canal serves as a strategic gateway to both Atlantic and Pacific markets. Any disruption to this flow could send shockwaves through the already volatile global energy market. Trump's policy shift, hinting at a tighter US grip over the Panama Canal, could create ripple effects in energy trade. For OPEC, this might signal increased uncertainty in getting its oil to key markets like China and Southeast Asia. With China being one of the world's largest oil importers and heavily reliant on the canal to access Middle Eastern oil, any constraints or additional costs imposed by the US could strain relations between Beijing and Washington even further. Trump's moves could also force OPEC to reassess its dealings with the US and China. For instance, if the US leverages its control over the canal to prioritize American energy exports, OPEC could retaliate by favoring agreements with China or other BRICS nations to sideline the US from strategic energy deals. This could further deepen the divide between Western economies and the BRICS bloc, reshaping alliances in the global energy landscape. Another layer of complexity emerges when considering the US's growing dominance in LNG exports. By controlling the canal, Trump's administration could position the US as a preferred supplier of LNG to Asia, undermining OPEC nations' influence in these lucrative markets. This, however, could provoke a retaliatory response from OPEC or BRICS nations, such as price cuts to undercut US competitiveness or increased investments in alternative shipping routes to bypass the canal entirely. It's also worth noting that any disruption in energy shipments could hit developing nations the hardest, as they rely on steady and affordable oil and gas supplies. If OPEC or BRICS countries perceive the US's actions as a direct threat to global energy stability, it could spark discussions of alternative trade routes or collaborative infrastructure projects, such as pipelines or land-based transport corridors, to reduce dependence on the canal altogether. Ultimately, the Panama Canal could become more than just a trade route. It could turn into a geopolitical pressure point. If Trump's policies escalate tensions, the canal might become the center of a broader energy standoff, reshaping how oil and gas flow across the globe. The US economy under Trump 2025. Donald Trump's return to the presidency comes with bold promises to revive US economic dominance, and the Panama Canal might be his first big play. By asserting influence over this vital trade route, Trump signals a strategy to prioritize American economic security, protect key trade flows, and leverage US geopolitical clout. But how does this fit into his broader economic vision, and what risks does it pose to the US economy and the global order? For Trump, the Panama Canal represents more than just a waterway. It's a powerful symbol of control over global trade. Tightening US influence could give American exporters a competitive edge, especially in sectors like agriculture, energy, and manufacturing. By ensuring US goods flow smoothly to key markets, Trump positions the canal as a strategic asset to make America great again economically. However, this aggressive move could trigger unintended consequences that ripple across the global economy. Potential trade wars loom as Trump's policies challenge nations that depend on the canal, such as China and BRICS countries. If canal access becomes a bargaining chip in negotiations, it might provoke retaliatory tariffs or sanctions, reigniting trade tensions that marked Trump's first term. For instance, China, which relies heavily on the canal for shipping goods to the Americas, could impose restrictions on US exports or double down on its Belt and Road Initiative to reduce reliance on American-controlled routes. This could hurt American farmers, manufacturers, and energy producers, key constituencies Trump aims to protect. Another risk is the potential impact on the dollar's dominance. Trump's nationalist approach might alienate key trade partners and encourage them to explore alternatives to the US-led financial system. BRICS nations, already discussing a new common currency to challenge the US dollar, might see this as a catalyst to accelerate those efforts. If trade tensions escalate, it could weaken global trust in the dollar as the world's reserve currency, potentially shifting more trade settlements to other currencies like the Chinese yuan or even cryptocurrencies. Domestically, Trump's moves could also backfire if disruptions to global trade lead to higher consumer prices or supply chain issues. American businesses relying on imports of raw materials or finished goods might face challenges, affecting everything from retail to construction. Additionally, heightened tensions with trading partners could hurt foreign investment in the US, which has been a vital driver of economic growth. However, Trump's strategy could also energize certain sectors of the US economy. By asserting control over a key trade artery, the US could gain leverage in renegotiating trade deals, pushing for more favorable terms that benefit American businesses. Energy exports, particularly LNG, could become a focal point, with the canal facilitating shipments to Asia and beyond. If managed carefully, this could solidify the US's role as a global energy leader and strengthen domestic industries. Ultimately, Trump's bold moves carry both potential and peril. While they may serve his vision of American economic resurgence, they could also deepen global divides and strain alliances. As the world watches these developments, the next question becomes clear. How will global trade and economies react to a more assertive US? Panama's position in the crossfire. Panama has found itself in an unexpected and precarious position following Trump's bold rhetoric about the canal. While the US frames its potential influence over the Panama Canal as a move for economic security, it puts Panama right in the middle of a geopolitical tug-of-war between the United States and other global powers like China and BRICS. The question now is, how will Panama respond to being thrust into the spotlight, and what does this mean for its political and economic future? Panama's government is already walking a tightrope. Historically, the canal has been a symbol of its sovereignty since the US handed over control in 1999. Trump's recent comments could be interpreted as an indirect challenge to that sovereignty. For a small nation like Panama, balancing diplomatic ties with both the US and China is critical. On one hand, Panama relies on its deep-rooted economic partnership with the US for stability. On the other hand, China's growing investments in Panama, such as infrastructure projects and trade agreements, cannot be ignored. China's influence in Panama is no small matter. It is the second largest user of the Panama Canal, after the United States, and has poured billions into the Panamanian economy. Projects like the Panama Colon Railway and investments in ports have strengthened China's foothold in the region. If the US begins to pressure Panama for preferential treatment or control, there's a strong possibility Panama could lean further toward China to counterbalance US influence. Such a shift could escalate tensions not only between the US and China, but also within Panama itself. For Panama's economy, the stakes are incredibly high. The canal is the lifeblood of its financial system, generating around $2 billion annually in toll revenues, a significant portion of the national budget. Any disruptions caused by heightened US influence or potential conflicts with China could jeopardize this critical revenue stream. Businesses that rely on smooth canal operations for imports and exports could face delays or increased costs, which would ripple throughout the economy. Panamanian citizens are also watching closely. The canal is more than just a trade route. It's a point of national pride and identity. Many fear that renewed US involvement could undermine their hard-fought independence over the canal. On the other hand, some see potential economic benefits from strengthening ties with the US, such as increased investment or security guarantees. Yet this optimism is tempered by the risks of becoming a battleground for larger powers vying for control. From a geopolitical standpoint, Panama could use this situation to its advantage, playing both sides to extract the best deals from both the US and China. However, such a strategy is fraught with risk. Leaning too far toward one side could alienate the other. leaving Panama vulnerable to economic or political retaliation. For now, the world is watching Panama's next move. Will it stand firm in its neutrality, or will it align more closely with either the US or China? As the tension escalates, the canal is no longer just a trade route. It's a symbol of the shifting balance of power in the 21st century. What happens next? The world is now waiting with bated breath. Trump's challenge to Panama and the indirect jab at China has set the stage for a geopolitical chess game that could have lasting repercussions. The Panama Canal may seem small on the map, but its importance in global trade makes it a battlefield for superpowers, and the next moves are sure to create massive global ripples. China, which has invested heavily in Latin America, is unlikely to sit idly by. The canal is not just a trade route for Beijing. It's a vital artery for its Belt and Road Initiative and its dominance in international shipping. Could we see China doubling down on its investments in the region, perhaps increasing economic aid to Panama, or even proposing a new canal elsewhere in Central America? The idea of China building alternative routes has been floated in the past and may become a reality if tensions escalate. On the other hand, BRICS, comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, might use this opportunity to strengthen their economic ties with Latin America. After all, the region's abundant resources and strategic trade routes make it an appealing ally in their quest to counterbalance Western influence. An economic alliance between BRICS and Latin American countries could shift the power dynamics in global trade, leaving the US with more competition than ever before. Domestically, Trump's bold move could reshape US foreign policy priorities. If his administration truly pushes for greater control or influence over the canal, it might spark trade tensions with China and even with Panama itself. This could lead to sanctions, counter-sanctions, and further volatility in global markets. Meanwhile, American allies might be left wondering if they too will be drawn into this tug-of-war, particularly as the US looks to secure strategic assets in the name of economic security. For Panama, the pressure is mounting. How the country navigates this moment will define its role on the global stage for years to come. Will it embrace US demands, risking its growing relationship with China? Or will it resist, potentially triggering economic backlash from Washington? Either way, Panama must tread carefully to protect its sovereignty, economy, and long-term prosperity. The ripple effects of this geopolitical standoff will extend far beyond the Americas. Trade-dependent economies in Europe, Asia, and Africa may find themselves caught in the crossfire. Shipping costs could rise, trade routes could be disrupted, and global supply chains might face unprecedented challenges, all due to the escalating tensions surrounding one narrow strip of water. As the world watches these events unfold, one thing is clear. The Panama Canal is no longer just a conduit for goods. It's a flashpoint for a new era of economic and geopolitical competition. And with major players like Trump, China, and BRICS all vying for influence, the stakes couldn't be higher. The big question is, will this usher in a new chapter of cooperation or a dangerous era of division? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain, the Panama Canal, though small on the map, is about to create massive global ripples.